Rebecca Gould was born on April the 28th, 1982, in the quiet town of Melbourne, Arkansas. She was one of 4 sisters, and after the youngest was born, their parents separated. The divorce was difficult at first, but the experience drew the sisters closer together. Living with their mother, they leaned on each other for strength, forming a tight-knit bond that only deepened over time. They remained close to their father too, splitting time between homes and maintaining strong family ties. After high school, Rebecca enrolled at Northwest Arkansas Community College in Fayetteville, where one of her sisters was already studying. Sharing a campus meant they could see each other almost daily. Despite their busy schedules, they often made the short 25-mile trip home to visit family. It wasn't always easy to find the time, but they made the effort. In September 2004, 22-year-old Rebecca was preparing for a big transition. She had plans to transfer to the University of Arkansas, but before making the move, she decided to complete one last semester at her current college. Before the new term began, she and her sister decided to head home for the weekend. Rebecca also had plans to see her boyfriend, who lived in a nearby town. After spending Sunday, September 19th, with their family, she left to visit him. The following day, she was supposed to pick up her sister so they could drive back together in her car. But when the time came, Rebecca never showed up. Rebecca's sister tried calling her several times, but each call went unanswered. At first, no one panicked. Rebecca was 22, responsible, and perfectly capable of making her own decisions. Her family figured she might just be catching up on sleep before heading back to college or spending a bit more time with friends. It wasn't out of character. But as the day wore on and still no one heard from her, the unease began to grow. By evening, her family was openly worried. They tried to stay hopeful. Maybe she had simply decided to stay in town for an extra night and would be back the next morning. But when Rebecca failed to show up or call the next day, and none of her friends had seen or heard from her, concern turned to fear. Her mother finally called the police. The investigation began quickly. Officers learned that Rebecca had spent the night at her boyfriend Casey's house and had even dropped him off at work the morning she disappeared, around 8:30 a.m. According to Casey, Rebecca was supposed to return to his house, gather her belongings, and later meet up with her sister for the drive back to Fayetteville. She also promised to pick him up after his shift, but she never came. Casey said he waited for her in the cafe parking lot. When she didn't arrive, he assumed plans had changed and went out with friends to a party. The police noted the timeline and asked if they could search his home. Casey agreed. Outside, Rebecca's car was still parked in the driveway. Inside, officers found her purse, complete with her identification, and her dog, both left behind. Strangely, her small suitcase with clothing was missing. According to Casey, she had it when she arrived, but now it was gone. The situation was becoming more troubling by the minute. Rebecca had vanished, and yet her most important belongings, including her beloved pet, were still at her boyfriend's house. But that wasn't all. One officer took note of something odd. The mattress on the bed was bare and sitting unevenly, as if it had been hastily repositioned. When he lifted it, he discovered large reddish stains underneath, stains that strongly resembled blood. That discovery prompted a more thorough search of the house. Soon, more blood was found, on the floor, smeared along the wallpaper. In the washing machine, investigators found blood-stained bedding, and scattered around the house were multiple bottles of bleach, suggesting someone had made a frantic attempt to clean up. It was an ominous scene. While it was still too early to confirm whether the blood was Rebecca's, DNA results would take several days, Investigators were already considering the grim possibility that she might no longer be alive. As forensic experts processed the home, detectives turned their attention to the person most likely to have last seen Rebecca, her boyfriend, Casey. Given the amount of blood found in his house, he quickly became the focal point of the investigation. Casey, however, denied having anything to do with Rebecca's disappearance. He repeated his earlier account that she had dropped him off at work the previous morning, and he hadn't seen or heard from her since. He told detectives that after spending the night with friends, he came home to change clothes before his next shift. According to him, he didn't notice any bloodstains in the house. He claimed he didn't smell bleach and didn't think much of Rebecca's car still being in the driveway, or the fact that her dog and purse were still inside. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. The police weren't quick to take Casey at his word, but at that point, they lacked concrete evidence to directly implicate him in Rebecca's disappearance, or anything more sinister. Still, they followed up on every detail. Detectives tracked down the friends Casey claimed to have spent Monday night with, and each of them confirmed his story. He had in fact been with them until the next morning. With a seemingly solid alibi in place, investigators shifted their focus and widened the search. Despite their efforts, the timeline remained murky. Rebecca hadn't answered any calls since early Monday morning, but the exact moment of her disappearance was still unclear. During questioning, Casey suggested detectives look into someone else, Rebecca's ex-boyfriend, a man named Justin. Police attempted to reach him, but he wasn't at home and didn't answer his phone. The timing was concerning. He'd seemingly gone off the radar at the same time his ex-girlfriend vanished. 2 days later, Justin finally resurfaced. He told police he had been at a casino with his father. Investigators verified his story, and the alibi checked out. He had been out of town the entire time. Then, detectives caught a break. In reconstructing Rebecca's movements on the day she vanished, they discovered she had stopped at a gas station not far from Casey's workplace. Surveillance footage and employee testimony confirmed she had come in around 8:30 a.m., bought a breakfast sandwich, and left, consistent with Casey's version of events. The detail that stood out most: the same sandwich, uneaten, was later found sitting in Casey's house. It was a small but telling clue, one that confirmed Rebecca made it back to the house that morning. Whatever happened to her happened shortly after she walked through that door. Given that Casey was already at work around the time Rebecca was believed to have returned to the house, detectives began to reconsider his role in the case. His alibi, once in doubt, now seemed more credible. Then came the blood analysis results. The stains found throughout Casey's home, on the mattress, walls, floor, and bedding, were confirmed to be Rebecca's. No foreign DNA was detected. While this didn't point to a specific suspect, it reinforced the belief that something violent had happened inside that house. Investigators pressed forward, conducting a wide sweep of interviews with Rebecca's relatives, close friends, and acquaintances. They considered the possibility that her attacker may have been someone familiar, someone with a personal motive. Detectives also turned their attention to Casey's circle, wondering if someone close to him might have had access to his home. But every lead came up short. Then, on September 27th, 1 week after Rebecca vanished, the case took a grim turn. Her body was discovered approximately 12 miles from Casey's home, at the bottom of an embankment off a quiet stretch of highway. The location was isolated and hidden from the road, making it unlikely that anyone would have found her by chance. Even more disturbing was how her body had been left, fully exposed, not concealed in any way. It appeared the killer had simply driven to the site, discarded her body, and left without a second thought. The autopsy revealed the extent of the violence. Rebecca had suffered multiple blows to the head with a heavy object, but the official cause of death was strangulation. There were no signs of defensive wounds, suggesting she may have been ambushed. The attack sudden and overwhelming. Medical examiners also found no evidence of sexual assault. As for the time of death, forensic examiners estimated that Rebecca's body had likely been lying at the bottom of the embankment for about a week. But beyond that, they couldn't pinpoint the moment she died with any precision. Back at Casey's house, detectives believed they had identified a possible murder weapon. A piano was missing one of its heavy, solid legs. Medical experts examined the shape and weight of the remaining legs and confirmed they were consistent with the blunt force injuries found on Rebecca's head. Casey told investigators that the missing leg had been loose for a while and could have come off easily. But when police searched both the house and the area where Rebecca's body was found, the leg was nowhere to be seen. Whether it had been hidden, disposed of, or taken as some kind of trophy remained unknown. With little physical evidence to guide them, investigators turned their attention to motive. A robbery was quickly ruled out. Nothing in the house appeared to be stolen, except for the piano leg and Rebecca's suitcase. Sexual assault was also ruled out, which left detectives with one grim possibility. The killer may have acted with the sole intention of ending Rebecca's life. Given that she appeared to have been killed soon after returning to Casey's house, detectives speculated the perpetrator may have known her schedule and known she would be alone that morning. That suggested premeditation. Just as troubling was the lack of forced entry. Police found no broken locks or signs of a struggle at the door. Rebecca may have let her killer inside, someone she trusted. Investigators believed the killer had spent several hours inside the house after the murder, desperately trying to scrub away the blood with bleach. Once the cleanup was complete, or at least as complete as they could manage, the perpetrator likely carried Rebecca's body to her own car and drove it to the remote embankment where it was later found. Despite these grim details, detectives were left with virtually no solid evidence. The investigation stalled. Police cast a wide net, considering hundreds of potential suspects, everyone from Rebecca and Casey's acquaintances to extended family members, neighbors, and even residents of nearby towns. But no connection, no motive, no clue emerged. The department was flooded with tips, yet none led anywhere. Many calls were based solely on suspicion, finger-pointing without substance. After months of chasing down fruitless leads, the case slowly went cold. Although investigators never gave up entirely, their efforts yielded no meaningful progress. Over the years, the case was reopened multiple times, passed between new teams of detectives, each hopeful they might succeed where others had failed. But time and again, the trail led nowhere. Part of what made this case so difficult was the lack of an apparent motive. Without understanding why someone would want to kill Rebecca, figuring out who might have done it became all the more complicated. Eventually, the mystery surrounding her death drew the attention of the true crime community. The case was featured in television programs and podcasts, sparking renewed public interest. One person who remained especially committed was journalist George Jared. He had followed the case since the very beginning, publishing a book, launching a podcast, and dedicating years of his life to finding out who killed Rebecca Gould. At some point in their independent investigation, George Jared crossed paths with Jennifer Colts, a former U.S. Army counterintelligence officer who had also taken an interest in Rebecca's case. The two decided to team up, combining their investigative instincts and experience. Together, they launched a Facebook group dedicated to the case, inviting public discussion and sharing theories with fellow true crime enthusiasts. It didn't take long for one particular member to stand out. A man named William Miller quickly became one of the group's most active participants. At first, it was his location that raised eyebrows. Miller lived in the Philippines. His intense interest in an unsolved murder from a small town in Arkansas, thousands of miles away, seemed unusual. But what really caught their attention was his behavior. Miller flooded the group with comments, offered intricate theories, and even messaged the admins privately. He wasn't just invested, he was fixated. He discussed obscure details with surprising precision, offering insights into specific moments of the investigation. Even more unsettling, he showed an uncanny familiarity with the geography surrounding the crime scene. George and Jennifer took notice. Though suspicious, they kept their doubts to themselves, fearing that confronting him too soon might scare him off. Instead, they continued engaging him, hoping to learn more. Then came a breakthrough, thanks to another group member, an amateur genealogist who decided to dig a little deeper into Miller's background. Using public information from his Facebook profile, she unearthed something that stunned the team. William Miller was a cousin of Casey, Rebecca's boyfriend, and the last person known to have seen her alive. After uncovering William Miller's family connection to the case, George and Jennifer decided it was time to involve law enforcement. They reached out to the detectives handling Rebecca's case and shared their growing suspicions about Miller's unusual interest and online behavior. When investigators revisited the case files, they were surprised to find that Miller's name had been there all along. Back in 2004, he had been briefly questioned. At the time, Miller said he had traveled from Texas to assist another relative and admitted to visiting Casey twice, once 2 days before Rebecca's disappearance and again the following day. During that second visit, he never went inside the house. According to Casey's original statement, Rebecca had noticed someone standing outside the window. It was Miller. Casey stepped outside, spoke with his cousin for about 15 minutes, and then Miller left. At the time, the encounter seemed insignificant and didn't raise any red flags. Now, with fresh eyes and new context, detectives saw things differently. They began looking more closely into Miller's background, and what they found was troubling. He had previously been a suspect in several criminal investigations. In 2002, he faced accusations of assaulting a minor. Later, he was arrested for breaking into his ex-wife's home and attacking her. Despite the serious nature of the charges, he had never been convicted in either case. Eventually, Miller left the country, moving to the Philippines, where he married, had children, and worked offshore oil jobs. Detectives wanted to bring him in for further questioning. But with Miller living overseas, they had no legal means to compel his return. Communication with him proved impossible, and the case stalled once again. That changed in 2020, when a notification from U.S. Customs landed on investigators' desks. William Miller was back. He had returned from the Philippines and was now staying in Oregon, where his mother lived. When detectives contacted Miller's mother, she claimed she hadn't seen her son in quite some time, but investigators already knew he was in town and that she was lying. Sensing an opportunity, they decided to confront Miller directly and bring him in for questioning. At that point, they had no physical evidence linking him to Rebecca's murder. If there was any chance of closing this case, they'd need a confession, and they knew it wouldn't come easy. So they crafted a strategy. Detective Mike McNeil, who was now leading the investigation, approached the interview casually. He told Miller it was a routine follow-up, part of the department's renewed effort to re-interview everyone involved in the original case. Miller didn't hesitate. He said he had nothing to hide and was happy to cooperate. That's when McNeil asked if he'd be willing to take a polygraph test back in Arkansas. Miller agreed, but the moment the detective picked up the phone and pretended to call the local police chief to arrange the test, his demeanor shifted. Miller suddenly grew tense and tried steering the conversation in a different direction. Unbeknownst to him, the polygraph specialist wasn't being called in. He was already waiting in the next room. Detectives weren't relying on the polygraph for courtroom evidence. They knew its results wouldn't hold up in trial. But that wasn't the point. This was a pressure tactic, designed to throw Miller off balance and hopefully break through his defenses. And it worked. Miller hesitated, then asked if polygraph results were admissible in court. Detective McNeil gave a deliberately vague response, saying that under certain circumstances they could be, carefully avoiding just how rare and limited those scenarios actually were. Visibly anxious, Miller agreed to the test. When it was over, the results were clear. He had failed. The polygraph operator concluded that Miller had been deceptive when answering all of the key questions, especially those related to Rebecca's murder. That's when McNeil shifted gears. He told Miller that forensic experts had recently reanalyzed evidence from the original investigation, and that Rebecca's DNA had been discovered in Miller's car. It wasn't true. Back in 2004, investigators had searched Miller's vehicle and found nothing. They hadn't even taken samples for testing. But in an interrogation room, officers are legally allowed to lie in order to elicit a confession. And McNeil knew this might be his best shot. Hearing this, Miller went quiet. The detective pressed harder, repeating that the evidence was conclusive, and the only thing Miller could control now was whether he wanted to cooperate. Then came a shift. Miller finally spoke, but not with a confession. Instead, he spun a new story. He claimed that he had arrived at his cousin's house that morning and found an unknown man in a mask standing over Rebecca's lifeless body. He said he panicked and fled, denying any responsibility. Detective McNeil didn't buy it. He kept pushing, dismantling Miller's story piece by piece. Finally, Miller stopped talking. He sat in silence for a long moment. Then, out of nowhere, he looked up and said, "I'm just going to tell you, I did it. I'm sorry for what I did." According to Miller, the morning of the murder began with a hunting trip in the woods near his cousin Casey's house. As he approached the property, he remembered that Casey's girlfriend Rebecca was staying there. For reasons he couldn't clearly explain, he said he decided to stop by and talk to her. He knocked on the door and told Rebecca he needed to use the phone. She let him in without hesitation. While she returned to the bedroom, Miller pretended to make a call, pacing the living room. Then, he claimed, something in him snapped. Miller described being overcome by an uncontrollable rage, a sudden and inexplicable urge to kill. He grabbed a leg from the piano, walked to the bedroom, and attacked. Rebecca was lying on the bed when he struck her multiple times in the head. Then he strangled her until she stopped breathing. After the murder, Miller wrapped her body in a sheet, carried it to his pickup truck, and attempted to clean the crime scene. He used bleach to wipe blood from the walls, floor, and bedding. Then he drove to a nearby highway and dumped her body beneath an embankment, a secluded spot he knew well from his school days in the area. When the detective asked him why he did it, Miller offered no concrete explanation. He simply said he had an urge to kill and couldn't stop himself. He ended the interview by saying he had lived with regret for years and was ready to accept responsibility for what he'd done. Following his confession, Miller was arrested and extradited to Arkansas to face charges. But once in custody, he abruptly changed course, recanting everything and insisting he was innocent. That sudden reversal put the case in jeopardy, casting doubt on whether his confession would hold up in court. By law, a confession must be made before a judge to be legally binding, especially in cases where there's no physical evidence tying a suspect to the crime. In Miller's case, there was yet another complication. During his arrest, the officer reading him his Miranda rights was interrupted mid-sentence when Miller asked a question, leaving the warning incomplete. That procedural misstep, combined with the lack of hard evidence, could have easily jeopardized the entire case. It opened the door to the possibility that Miller's confession might be thrown out, and that he could walk free. But the judge ultimately ruled the confession admissible. Miller had opportunity. He was in town at the time of the murder, knew his cousin's work schedule, and his account of the crime matched critical details investigators had never released to the public. Ironically, Miller had a straightforward path to escape justice. When detectives contacted him in Oregon, he could have declined to cooperate or simply walked out of the station. There was nothing legally holding him there. With no forensic evidence or warrant, he could have caught the next flight back to the Philippines, vanishing beyond the reach of U.S. authorities. Without evidence to support extradition, the case likely would have remained unsolved. Yet Detective McNeil believed Miller never intended to flee. His online activity told a different story. The frequent messages to admins, detailed theories, and unsolicited commentary all pointed to a man who wasn't hiding, but rather circling the truth. If Miller truly wanted to distance himself from the case, he could have stayed silent. Instead, he inserted himself into the narrative, and when finally confronted, he didn't ask for a lawyer or try to walk away. McNeil suspected there was a reason. Miller had been carrying the weight of his guilt for years, and when the moment came, he simply couldn't hold it in any longer. Despite initially retracting his confession, William Miller ultimately changed course and struck a plea deal with prosecutors. In 2022, he formally admitted to the murder of Rebecca Gould and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. But the story didn't end there. While behind bars, Miller made a chilling claim. He confessed to killing 5 additional women over the course of his life. He couldn't provide their names and said he didn't know them. According to Miller, he would pick up women who fit a specific profile, young, petite, slim, with light-colored hair, lure them into his vehicle, drive them to remote areas, and kill them. To detectives, the description was eerily familiar. Rebecca matched his so-called type almost exactly. If Miller was telling the truth, it cast new light on Rebecca's murder. Perhaps she wasn't killed because of a personal conflict or family connection. Perhaps she was targeted simply because she fit his pattern. His decades-long work on oil rigs had taken him across various states, making it plausible that he could have committed these crimes in different jurisdictions without raising suspicion. So far, law enforcement hasn't found evidence to support his claims, but investigations are still underway. Even so, not everyone is convinced by Miller's confession. To this day, some people question whether he truly killed Rebecca. They argue that someone without a clear motive, especially a relative, couldn't have committed such a brutal crime. Some point the finger at Rebecca's boyfriend, speculating that Miller may have helped cover up the murder rather than carry it out himself. Others believe Miller invented the claims about additional victims to gain attention or manipulate the system. But without any hard evidence to support these theories, Miller remains the sole person held responsible for Rebecca's murder in the eyes of the law. Whether he is also a serial killer, or simply a man trying to inflate his crimes, is a question that remains unanswered as the investigation continues.